The new card visual got its first upgrade, which is reference labels. And that is a big one, because now we can add in an easy way reference points to the main values that you show on the card visual. But with a few tricks, we can also use that feature to add data bars, like this one over here, or this one over here. Now, let me show you how it's done. Now let's dive in straight away and let's see how we can use the new reference labels feature for the new card visual. Now, to follow along, you need to be on the November 23 version and you need to go to Options Settings, Preview Options, and turn the new card visual on. And then you're ready to go. All right, so what we're going to focus on is how can we use the new reference label feature to add a data bar to the new card visual like this over here. Or we can make it look like this. Now, let's go over it step by step. If you want to get an overview of the new card visual first, then check out this video first. All right, now let's get started. First of all, we have to create a new card visual. So we go over here to the Home tab and then to the charts, and there we're going to use the new card visual. All right, now for this example, we're going to have a look at the sales of the current quarter and see how it compares to the forecasted value. Now, I already have a measure, sales, current quarter. Now, let me open it up. And there we just have the sales actuals with a filter on the current year and current quarter. That's it. Okay, now I'm going to take that measure and drag it onto the visual. And it shows 0.0 million. Why is that? Because I'm using a custom formatting string that already shows my values in millions. And if I go to the formatting options and then over here, the callout value, there, the display unit is set to auto. And instead of auto, which chooses to again show it in millions, I'm going to put this to none. All right, and now it shows correctly 61.4 million. All right, just how I set it up in the formatting string. Now that we have this, I want to add extra detail to this and show also how it compares to the forecasted value. Now the thing is though, if we have a closer look here at the options, well, here there's no option that lets me add extra information behind it. So instead of using here the callout value, I'm going to turn this one off. All right, and we're going to use reference labels instead. The new feature that wasn't there before the November 23 version. So let's open this up and let's see what we can do over here. Now, first of all, we can choose the series. Now, all our sales current quarter. Well, over here, we just have one main series, current quarter. So let's select it. Then we can add a label. So let's click on add data. And over here, we can choose a measure. Now, the measure needs to show what I want to have as the main value first. Okay, so that is the sales current quarter. All right, and here we have again the same problem. It shows 0.0 million, so let's fix that first. Now, what you have to watch out for is what label is selected, even though at the moment we just have one. Well, here we want to have the sales current quarter. Then here we have the title, which is that first part, basically just the measure name of what you use for that label. Now, that I don't want to show. All right, and then we can go to the value. Let's open that up. And over here, we can play around with how big should that value show, right? So instead of 14, I want to show it, well, in font size 28. And maybe you want to have it bold, and you can play around with that. Now, another thing that you see over here is display units. Now, I don't want to leave it on auto because I'm using a custom formatting string. I'm going to put this to none. All right, now, if you want to know all of the details about custom formatting strings, then just check out this video over there. All right, so we have the correct value showing for the sales of the current quarter in a way that we wanted to show with the right units. But it shows there at this bottom section below a divider line with a different background color, and that I want to change. Now, to do that, we have to go back over here, then go here to the divider and the background and turn it off. But it's grayed out. Why is it grayed out? Because it depends on what is currently selected here for the label. If I switch to all, then, well, we can turn the background off, but we cannot turn the divider off. Annoying. Well, that again depends on the selected series. If I switch this one to all, you see, then we can also turn the divider line off. All right, so always watch out what is selected, which series is selected for the label, and which series is selected over there at the top. All right, so only then you can turn these features off. Now, why did we go through all of this effort if the result that we got to now looks almost the same as what we had before with the callout value option. Now, that's because with reference labels, we have 3 different parts. Now, let me go there again. Let's open the reference labels. Let's select a series. And here you see we have 3 different parts. We have the title, the value, and the detail. Now, in this case, we don't want to have a part before the number, so title is turned off. Then here we have the value itself, that one we want to show. But now we also have over here the detail part, and that we're going to use to add something extra behind it. For example, the percentage difference to the forecast. Okay, now we can do that, but we need a measure. So let's add a measure. So I go over here, add a new measure. All right, now let's call this measure sales versus forecast. And we're going to have different parts. So let's use variables. And the first one I'm going to call just value, the main value that I want to show, which is going to be the actual sales versus the forecast. So I can use a divide function and say that I want to have the actual sales and divide that by the forecasted sales. Okay, now that will give us the value, but to control how it gets formatted, we use a format function. And then there at the end, we can use a formatting string. So let's say we want to show the percentages. All right, then we would have 0%, now with 1 decimal always, then 0.0 like I have over here. Okay, now this we're going to combine with some text, so pre-text, all right. And there I want to say that this is a comparison of the actuals to the forecast. Now often you use a delta icon, so I can use Windows key dot, and then over here, go to the symbols that I use a lot, and then over here, look for a delta icon, which I recently used over there. Perfect. Now, I want to have the difference to the forecast in percentages. So maybe something like this. All right, and then another variable for the spaces that we're going to add. Now that will need a little bit of extra attention in a second. Now over here, we can also use the quotation marks, just the space in between. All right, and then the final variable for the label itself. Now I want to start off with a space. Okay, so let's start with that one. Then I want to combine that with the pretext. All right, and then I want to have another space. Okay, so I refer to that variable, and that needs to be followed by the value. All right, and then the value, and this is basically the whole label that we want to return. So because we use variables, in the end you need a return statement, and I want to return the label. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have this measure, let's go and use it there for the detail part of the reference label. So I'm going to open the formatting options again, go to the reference labels, detail, and make sure that here for the label, the sales current quarter is selected. All right, then go to detail, and then we can say add data and choose the measure that we just wrote. Okay, now that looks good. We have now that extra part showing behind it. And the nice thing is we can completely control the formatting of it. So we can make it, for example, a little bit smaller or bigger and make it look exactly the way we want it to look like. And we can determine, for example, also the font color, again, with another measure, but we save that for later. All right, now I'm just thinking I'm seeing the wrong values. Let me just double check that value for the measure again. So I'm gonna go back. Now over here, I don't want to have the sales actuals, but the sales for the current quarter and the forecast for the, well, current quarter. Okay, perfect. Now, another thing that I want to do is add a little bit of extra space in between the text, the pretext, and the values. Now, therefore, I'm going to go and add some extra spaces here. Now, you see that the extra spaces get removed. Now, to prevent that from happening, we need a space like character that doesn't get removed, which we can get from emptycharacter.com. So I'm going to go to that website, copy it from here, and then go back. And then here where we have these spaces, I'm just going to paste what I just copied. All right, now maybe we also want to use a red function if we want to repeat that space character multiple times, let's say 5 times. All right, and let's see how that looks like. Okay, now you see this does work, and we do have some extra space now between the pretext, the value, and the main value at the beginning. Now, if you want to reduce the space that we have vertically between that label and our reference label, then we need to go back to the formatting options. Now, I believe we have to go to callout, and then from here, spacing. And that vertical spacing, we can decrease all the way, for example, to 0. And you see now we have less space there. All right, now the value for the reference label I want to have in bold. So let's open here the reference label section and then go here to value and make it bold. Perfect. All right, so now the moment that you have been waiting for, how to add the data bar, like this one over here. Okay, now for that, again, we are going to use a new measure. So I'm gonna go over here, add a new measure. All right, now let's call this measure data bars or data bar for the sales versus forecast. Okay, now this measure is going to return the data bar. Okay, now for that we have quite a few components. So again, variables. Let's start with the very first one, the total number of icons that we want to show. And each icon is going to be a building block for the bar that we're building. And that bar can be blocks, circles, stars, whatever you want. Okay, so we're going to have a total number of icons. Number of icons total. Okay, now let's put it to 10. And then the next one. Then we're going to have a certain number of icons that we want to fill. All right, so let's call this one number of icons fill. Let's put it to 3. All right, and then we have the number of icons again. So number of icons that are going to be empty. So 10 minus 3 is 7. So I can refer back to the previous variable. So the total number of icons minus the number of icons that we are going to fill up. Okay, so then the next part. Now we want to have a variable for the icon itself. So we're going to have icon fill. All right, that's going to be one icon. And then we're going to have a different icon, icon empty, which is going to be, again, another icon. Okay, now instead of X and Y, we can also look for the actual icons that we're going to use a bit later. So Windows key dot, and then search over here for the icon that you want to have. So for example, here, these circles I could use, or I used before also these little squares or triangles, whatever you like. Now, you can also Google. So for example, over here, circle unicar, go there and just copy that unique character. All right, so once you have found your icons, just copy them over to your measure. And then here, the last variable that's going to be the variable that's going to return the actual data bar. So let's call it data bar. And here we can again use that wrapped function. Now, first of all, we want to repeat the icon fill. And how many times? Well, we want to have whatever that variable is going to return, icons fill. All right, so for now, that is filled out as free, okay? And we want to combine that with another part where we can use that other icon empty. And that one we want to repeat as many times as we say in the number of icons empty variable. Okay, now, once you have this, then we can return the very last variable. Okay, the data bar variable. All right, so now that we have this measure, the hard part is behind us and we can use it as a reference label on our new card visual. Now, let's see how this works. Let's go to the formatting options and then open the reference labels section. Now here, we want to add labels and it's going to be determined by the new measure that we just wrote. So the data bar sales versus forecast. Okay. All right. Now that looks already pretty good. We have now 3 circles that are filled up and the empty circles, 7 of them behind them and some weird hyphens there at the end. Well, that is just placeholders for the detail section, which is currently blank, right? So we have to go over here and then select the new label, data bar, and then go over here, turn the detail section off. Okay. Now, not too bad, right? So we have here these filled up circles and it's basically just text that shows. So we can go here to value, we can make them bigger or smaller, and we can play around with the font color as well. So we can make them blue, for example. All right, so now that we have this, how can we bind it to our data? How can we make it change dynamically instead of hard coding here that 3 circles should be filled up and the other ones shouldn't? Well, one thing that you might point out is, well, over here you have 74%. So how many circles should be filled up? Well, here you could come up with your own rule, right? So you could, for example, say, when it's 74, we fill up 7 or 8 circles, depending on how you want to do the rounding. And if you need to be more exact, well, then you can simply show more circles, all right? So for simplicity, I stick here to 10 circles, okay? So it's not super exact. It just gives you an indication, right? Now, that is important. Let's now go back to the measure and bind it to the data. So I'm going to go over here. Data bar, sales versus forecast, that's the measure. Now the value that needs to be dynamic here is the number of icons that need to be filled up, and as a consequence, also the number of icons that need to be empty. Now, instead of hard coding that 3, let's get rid of it, and let's calculate how many it should be based on the percentage of the forecasted value. All right, so let's add another variable that returns that value, so percent of forecast. Okay, and this we can calculate again with the divide function. So divide, and then here we have the current quarter actual sales. So the actual sales of the current quarter. So current quarter actual sales. Divide that by the current quarter forecasted sales. Okay, and then that value, let's say it's now 74.3%. So that we can then multiply by the number of icons total. Okay, so that variable over there. So what will happen if it is 74%, like it is at the moment, 7 icons would be filled up. If it goes over the 75%, then we could round it to 80. That's kind of the default. Now, if you want to have a little bit more control, then you can also use here a round function, right? To control that a little bit more. Round up, round down. Now, another thing that you have to pay attention to is what happens actually then if we have actual sales that are above the forecast, right? Because then we would get more icons that need to be filled up as the total number of icons, and that would not make sense. So we need to wrap this inside of a min function and take the minimum of that value and 100%, or not just a 1. Okay, good. So that's it. Now let's see what it returns at the moment. And there you go. As predicted, we have 7 icons that nicely get filled up. And what if you want these circles to be bigger or smaller? That you can control under formatting options. Now, these are reference labels and just the values of these reference labels. And you see, if I make that font a little bit smaller or bigger, you see it takes more or less space. All right. Now, the smallest that we can make them is 8. Then it would be super small. However, that could allow you to, for example, add more of these icons, right? So now I could go for maybe 20, and let's see what happens. Then you would be a little bit more exact. You would have smaller blocks, however, and not that readable anymore. It just depends also a little bit on how much space you can give the visualization, okay? Now, let's say we want to have the 10 from before, and then I want to have the font size a little bit bigger again. So I'm going to make it 14. And another thing that we can play around with is the icon itself, right? So for now, we just chose the circles. But if we go back over here, we can also go for different icons. Let's play around with this. Let's, for example, go for rectangles or squares. Now, I just copy them over. Now, there you go. And let's see how this looks like. Now, that looks also pretty good. Now, not only the icon you can play around with, you can actually also go to the formatting options and play a little bit with the font type. Now, instead of Segui UI, I could also go here for, you see the Sans Unicode. Now, you see, that would already make it smaller. And then over here, also play around with, for example, bold and cursive. You see, that also has an interesting effect, okay? Now, I'm just going to change it back once more. And now I'm going to choose an icon that kind of looks similar. However, it doesn't have any space around it. And we have that for the filled one. And let me also copy over the non-filled one. All right. And let's see how that looks. And you see, that is also kind of interesting. All right, so that's the whole trick, how to build a data bar for the new card visual using the new reference label feature. All right, now let me give you one more example. Now, instead of having one bar, it sometimes also makes sense to have more than one bar. For example, if you want to compare the current quarter with the previous quarter, right? And then have 2 bars and add some extra detail what the percentage difference is. Now, let's see how we can do that. Now, I'm going to go back to the card visual, go over here to the formatting options. And first of all, let's get rid of the data bar that's already there. And maybe for now, let's also get rid of that extra detail label that we have for that first reference label. So select label sales current quarter, detail label, I'm going to turn off. Now here under measures, I already set up 2 measures with the data bars for the current quarter and for the previous quarter. Now over here, you see that the logic is almost the same. The only difference is here, percentage to the forecast is now max sales quarterly. So I look at what basically that maximum point needs to be. That's going to be used for the sizing of the bars. Okay, now here you can use a maxx, iterate over the year quarters, and then calculate the sales actuals and pick the maximum one. All right, and once we have that max sales quarterly, then we can divide the current quarter sales by that number and multiply it by the number of icons total to come up with a value for how many icons we want to fill up. Okay, now everything else that follows is the same. Now, for the previous quarter, there I've done exactly the same, so no difference, but then for the previous quarter. And now we can use these two as reference labels for the new card visual. So I go here to options. Now here, reference labels is the place to go. And here we can add those new measures as labels. So current quarter, and we have the previous quarter. All right, now that doesn't look so good. They have the same size. However, if I would make it bigger, you see, then there clearly is a difference. Now, here we just need to play around with the formatting again. So what I'm going to do is go here to value and make the value a little bit smaller for those two. Now, make sure that the right label is selected. So current quarter and previous quarter, value, and I'm going to set it to maybe even smaller than that. Let's go for 8 or maybe a little bit bigger. Done, just like this. Okay, and for the other one, we do exactly the same. We can also turn the detail off, and then we do the same for current quarter. So done as font size, and then here detail, I'm going to turn off. Now, if you want, you can also go for a different color. So maybe here you want to go for blue again, and then for the other one, for the previous quarter sales, maybe also blue, but a little bit lighter. Okay, now I'm going to resize it so that it nicely fits into the space that I allocate here for that new card visual. Now, we're not done yet. We can still make use of the extra detail part, right? So we can have, again, another measure. So here you see we have label sales current quarter and previous quarter, where we can add any logic we like. So over here we can say, all right, we start with a little bit of extra space, and then if the sales for the current quarter is larger than the previous quarter one, then we want to have an arrow up, otherwise down, and this needs to be followed by the sales quarter over quarter as a percentage. And to control the formatting, we wrap it inside of a format function. Now, this we can then use for the detail part of the correct label. So that's going to be data bar sales current quarter. Then we go to detail, turn it on, and then we get these two hyphens. Now, that is just the placeholder when it's blank. Now we can add the data, and that needs to be the label for the sales current quarter. And you see, -5%. Now, it's a little bit big, so I'm going to make it a bit smaller. And so over here, let's play around with the size. Done, that kind of works. And then for the previous quarter, we do exactly the same. Also there, I have a measure set up. So I'm going to choose that label, go over here to detail, turn it on, and then here, choose that other measure that I have, which is called sales, label sales previous quarter. All right, there it is. Also this one, we can make a little bit smaller. You see, you have kind of full control over every single element, which is kind of nice. And this is just the value that gets returned from the previous quarter, nothing special. Now, then as another step, we can apply conditional formatting to it. For example, here, when it's below 0, it needs to show in red. Now, again, make sure that the right label is selected. All right, then go to the details section. There, I want to have conditional formatting applied to, let's say, the font, and click here on the FX button. Now, we could write a measure or just use a rule where we want to say something like, if it is bigger than or equal to 0 and smaller than the maximum, then I want it to show in green. Okay, so just pick a green color. And then another rule where we want to have kind of the opposite. If it's below 0, then it needs to show in red. And it shows in green, which means I made a mistake. Let's go back. And you need to, of course, make sure that it's based on the right measure, right? So over here, it's sales current quarter. It should be based on the sales quarter-over-quarter percentage. Okay, now it shows correctly in red. All right, that's it. Now we have 2 reference labels that we converted to data bars, and then also show extra information using that detail section and conditional formatting to make it extra nice. All right, now I hope that you like this little trick and have fun experimenting with all of the different icons. I'm curious what you come up with. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. I want to thank you for watching. And if you want to build reports together with me, then check out my upcoming training over here. If you cannot wait, then I have these videos over here so that you can keep on going. I hope to see you in the next video.